All right, look, we've been working sort of quite hard on what the alternative is to option one. I think people have clearly understood from all of the discussions that have been had over the last wee while that what the community board presented was in fact a long-term option, and so not within the framework of what we are capable of considering right now. That would have to be considered as part of the LTP. And so I've just been working with a variety of people to see if we could come up with some wording that captured that. Now, I'm just not going to accept any motions at the moment because there's going to be a bit of a conversation. There's a number of questions that people have, and I want to allow sufficient time for those questions to be asked and answered. I mean, the first document talks about staff engaging with Environment Canterbury to clarify roles and responsibilities in the coastal environment, and I think that's really important that we get feedback from staff on that. I know that they're in the early days of that consideration, but that's an important issue. The ones that I've been working on is that we proceed to approve the identified extensions of the bund from Bridge Street to the South Brighton Jetty, and that's picking up the language of the first resolution that's in front of us, but that we agree that no, actually that's actually, it shouldn't read agreed. I'll change my own words there. It should read defer consideration of any extension to the bund proposed from Yacht Club to await further advice once the Tonkin and Taylor report has been received and consideration has been given to the regeneration strategy for this area. And that way it actually provides context for the deferral. It means that what the community board were considering was a long-term option, and we're only looking at short-term options. And I think one of the questions for staff will be, well, what are the risks associated with deferring in this space? And I think that a number of councillors have got questions around the land drainage recovery program and the fact that this wasn't a priority area over other priority areas, and what the impact is on the land drainage recovery program. So there's a whole range of issues, so I kind of would like it to be relatively open and engaged with staff. So if I could start with my first question, which is we've asked staff to engage with Environment Canterbury to clarify roles and responsibilities in this coastal environment, and I'd just like some feedback on how that process has begun. I know that you haven't got very far, but it would be really good to have a little bit of feedback on where you've got to so far, and I think Helen might be joining us at the table. Right.
All right. So we have had we have had 2 preliminary meetings with Environment Canterbury staff around the broader issues of planning for the coastal environment, because they've also got some, they've also got some planning mechanisms in the wind in terms of updating the regional coastal environment plan. So Environment Canterbury are keen on 3 things with respect to South Shore. First of all, they're keen on having a governance conversation about the coast and how we adapt to climate change and changes due to the earthquake along our coastline, and they are proposing that we set that up under the regular forum that our councillors have with their councillors. The second thing is that they support the regeneration strategy as the place to have the conversation about the long-term proposals for South Shore and South New Brighton, and they see that as perhaps one of the first serious conversations we have about adaptation to climate change for our coastal communities. So they very much support that, and in the meantime they would support a do minimum option with respect to the emergency works that are being carried out. So that's the gist of it.
Great, that's good. Okay, Sarah?
Thank you. I'd just like to go back to the original notice in motion. On the 3rd of August, the part 2 of the notice of motion that was approved looked at extending the bund, so completing to a robust extent of the stuff that had been done, which was fine, but to extend this work as necessary to prevent seawater inundation along the seaward estuary side of Southshore and the South Brighton Domain to the jetty. One of the reasons I voted for this was because of the words as necessary, and I know that while a whole pile of work has been done to look at where the bunds would go and how they would be done, what we haven't had is actually information on whether the bunds are necessary or not. I mean, there might be a desire, those kind of things, but are these bunds necessary to actually protect houses that have flooded?
In response, so the South Shore area did see some flooding in July. This proposal is based around modelled information and risk balancing. So every storm is different, so we've got to be careful not to fall in the trap of just chasing what happened in the last storm. The information that we have is that a bund provided through the domain, the middle section as proposed, would have benefit in protecting particularly the campground area. In very extreme events, there could be inundation that goes beyond the domain and through to the residential areas, but in most frequent flooding events, that it wouldn't get that far.
And the report says that the number of houses that have been identified might be overstated even at that point.
Yeah, so that original estimate was based on what we call a bathtub model, so just filling up behind the estuary edge. We've now had some preliminary hydraulic modelling that shows, as alluded to in that earlier report, that the risk is lower because the amount of time the tide can overtop the edge doesn't fill that bathtub. Yeah, and the other place that we see the words as necessary appear is actually in the reserve management plan. So when it comes to the objective to protect and provide for flood protection functions of the reserves, it does allow for that, which is excellent. But 3.3.1 says allow stop banks, retention basins or other flood protection measures to be raised, extended and maintained as necessary for flood protection. And I'm just wondering if the test here again for the extension, like I completely understand the stop banks that are currently in place and they have protected homes, but the actual extension, whether it meets the test of being necessary to be able to place them in this reserve at this time. In response, we have identified inside the Land Drainage Recovery Program a need for work of this or a similar nature in this area, and however though we had prioritised it after the Heathcote and Avon Floodplain Management Implementation Plan processes. So the need was foreseen for this type of work, but it was foreseen to occur a little bit later in time.
But would it be necessary or sort of desired, or I mean, is it necessary, especially when we've got more information coming through Tonkin and Taylor or those kind of things? Do we know that it's necessary, or are we still actually not quite have the information to spend an extra $1 million that may not be necessary of ratepayers' money?
My response would be our preliminary hydraulic modelling is showing that the risk is lower than that original estimate for the reasons I explained earlier, and that our understanding is developing with time, and that with any capital works program we would respond to any significant change and bring decisions back to council. So yes, the risk is lower than previously thought, and if the subsequent hydraulic modelling that we do when we go through and confirm those results and test different scenarios, if that showed that the risk was in fact quite low, would certainly come back and, or much lower than previously reported, would come back to you with a subsequent decision making process.
Thank you. So the timing for that though, so if we today looked at approving extending works and there are contractors already sort of teed up to do some of that work, would your new modelling and advice that we wouldn't necessarily need the bunds be in time to stop the work happening and stop the spend?
We certainly, well, we're undertaking that design work now. We've engaged design consultants to do that work, and it would certainly be in advance of physical works.
No, but the modelling work that would show whether the work was necessary or not wouldn't be done until the works were done and contracted.
No, the intent is certainly to do the design work before we do any construction work, and then there'll be a window of opportunity to come back to council if it's necessary.
Okay, so but we could potentially not decide today to do the bund, wait till that work has been done, and then decide whether it's needed or not, rather than you having to come back and saying, oh, could you rescind your previous decision?
I think that there is just that risk assessment to be made in terms of the likelihood of another major storm event while there's any deferral. The risk that we determine, whilst we don't know the exact details, are that it would require an extreme storm event in order to inundate that area. So on that basis, a deferral would be considered to be relatively low risk, whilst further work was being carried out.
Phil, and then David.
So Keith, just for clarification, are you really saying that if we approve the northern part, but still leave the piece in the middle on the map, that in fact the risk of flooding or inundation is relatively low?
If we consider the three sections, the section to the south that we've already built, the middle section through Domain and the northern section to Bridge Street, I think in terms of priority, the first priority would be the southern section that we've already built a temporary bund for. The second priority would be the northern section, Bridge Street, and the third section in terms of flood protection would be the central area from the jetty to the boardwalk. So, we're considering the assessment on that basis.
And so the other question I've got is around by not progressing the middle section, given that there's machinery, for example, already there constructing the car park area. Have you got some kind of estimate of extra costs if we don't complete that section? And they'd have to come back to do it again sometime, presumably.
It's not currently our intent to utilise that existing parks contract for the car park area for enacting any works that are resolved today, or the stabilisation works to the southern portion resolved earlier. That would be a new physical works contract. Whether or not you could let one physical works contract for the entire area that is presented in this report, if that was staged, then there is likely to be additional costs if you had multiple construction contracts.
It's likely though that the setup costs of coming back more than once would be relatively small in relation to the overall scale of the package.
Okay. And my final question really is around making sure that this decision would be consistent with the reserve management plan too. I assume that the first part, the northern part is, and that in fact if we follow the decision, the recommendation to defer the middle section, that in fact it would still be consistent, this decision will be consistent with that management plan.
Yes, that's correct. Yep. If nothing is built in the short term, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
David and then Pauline.
Look, I just wanted to focus on some of the questions being asked, but the risks associated with what I would call Area 1, just by Bridge Street, can you confirm there is some planning for a stop bank to be progressed from Bridge Street to a certain length into the towards the jetty? I think probably a couple of 100 metres. Is that in recognition that there is a flood risk in that area, and will the bunding that I hope we approve with item 1 here actually be of benefit to reducing flooding, particularly in that Seafield place and the back of the school?
Yes, there is some proposals for a short length of additional bund just right by Bridge Street.
Of stop bank?
Of stop bank, correct, yeah. As part of the wider Avon River stop banking project. And yes, again, that the bund that is proposed between the jetty and those works are there primarily for the benefit of those residents along Seafield Place.
Thank you. And I agree with you. I think the bit in the middle, the flood risk, while there is still a risk there, it's not to the same extent as around the area immediately adjacent to Bridge Street. Cheers.
Thank you. Pauline?
Yeah,
Yanni?
thank you. Just clarification again. If we did nothing more today, the risk is still as low, in your view? I mean, no one's got a crystal ball, but the risk is low.
I don't know.
Yes.
So focus on the residential properties up the south end of Bridge Street, because I think that is a little bit
yes,
more
I think
concerning.
from the Land Drainage Recovery Programme point of view, we do focus on risk to residential properties and primarily to above floor flooding. Any measures that we build will reduce risk, but there's always potentially a bigger storm, so it's what level we protect at. I think the northernmost section from Bridge Street to the jetty, there would be more risk reduction benefit in building that than there would be through the central section.
Okay, and then if that piece there was done, what would the cost of that be? Because we've got 1 to 1.4 million attached to, if we did the 3 bits, one of which we've done, what would be the cost of Bridge Street to the jetty piece?
The early estimates indicate it might be in the realm of $500,000 to $600,000. So in that sort of order, it's about half the length roughly, but a little bit over there.
Right. Thank you.
Yep. Yanni, then Sarah.
Yeah, we got notification from South Brighton Residents Association a few days ago. We haven't had advice back on that. Can someone just give us an explanation about how that notification fits in with the decisions that we're making today?
Sorry, what are you talking about?
So, so what I'm worried about is we're making a decision about, to do something to either minimise or mitigate a level of risk to a community who's given us a notice around notification for liability of risk. So I would like to sort of understand how these two are related, if at all, but do we need to do that in PX?
Frame it a different way. Frame it into a different question.
Sorry, hang on. Well, what, so we don't talk about it?
It's about expectation, is it?
No,
Sorry, I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay,
I haven't seen anything.
Cool.
No, but there's no point you sending it to me right now because I'm not going to be able to read it. So, because has somebody referred it for legal advice? Yep.
We could frame it into a question, if you like, to staff that if we were to approve further bunds and they fail, what is our liability? Are we increasing an expectation? And you're saying we can't predict the extent?
No. I think the question that he's asking is the other way around, which is if we fail to approve an extension of the bund that protects properties and there is a subsequent flood event which affects houses in the area that would otherwise have received some protection from these, is there a liability question that arises? And I guess that's the legal question that we're asking for some advice on. But
and I think my question's valid also.
But that's the inverse. That's the inverse.
But I'm just saying, it's hard for me to make a decision today, given the number of questions that relate to either doing something or doing nothing, without knowing a response to that we got on the 4th of October. And so we did say we would get some advice when it's received, and I was just wondering if we can get that advice.
I have no idea what you're talking about, so
okay.
I don't get direct emails anymore, so they just go into the organisation.
Because it did go to you as well. So
hey?
It did come into you. But, yep. Okay. So can I just a second question then? Not related to that, but we also had a deputation from South Brighton, and that just got me thinking. I've read through in terms of the community views and preferences, where you talk about, I guess, the community board engaging, but is there any other sort of expectation in terms of or process that we could use to actually engage and consult with the wider community rather than just having the sort of anecdotal feedback from the community board? And I don't want to, this is just on 710 on page 121. I don't want to minimise the view of the community board. That's very important, and the groups that they've represented. But we've had a number of letters, deputations previously that of people that have expressed, some concerned views. And I just wondered what the process is that we can robustly engage with the wider affected parties before we decide on an option.
Short-term options is that the development plan would be the appropriate. But there has been a robust consultation process enacted in order to inform that development plan. Sorry.
Yeah, do you want to speak to
So, in preparation of the existing management plan and development plan, there was a public consultation undertaken to determine the content of that. So if you're looking at modifications, then we have to reconsider options for reconsultation if the plan is going to be changed.
I just want to be clear. If we go with option 1, we don't need to seek community views, or if we go for half of option 1, we don't need to seek community views because those views have been sought through the management plan?
Yes.
And that was in 2014?
That's right.
Do you think it's fair to rely on views from 2014 and 2017, nearly 2018?
So you have to ask the question of what's changed, I suppose.
Well, just whether it's I guess in terms of risk of challenge of process or fair process, whether, I guess we're nearly 2018, whether we should be relying on 2014 views without going back to the community.
Well, normally you wouldn't modify a management plan within at least 5 years, unless there's been some significant change in circumstances or information to hand, or
the flooding events would.
Well, they're just land drainage staff have indicated that the risk is very low, though. So,
okay. I mean, because it's not an area that I'm familiar with, other than we've had a few reports to council. Obviously, the local board and the councillors will be well aware of it. I am surprised at the number of people that are still approaching us with concerns over what's being proposed. Mm-hmm. And so I would think that maybe that should be a sort of flag that we might need to go and seek community views before agreeing to an option.
Yeah, I suppose the resource consent for the stabilisation and emergency works could also be another point, but we don't know if that will be notified or not yet.
Okay, yeah. Just in terms of the broader views and the longer term options, as part of the regeneration strategy, it involves full engagement process with the community. So we're working on an engagement plan at the moment, and it will be community-led to get the best and fullest involvement of that community in South Shore and South New Brighton. So that's one way to test those views.
This is what we've explained right at the start. There's a difference between short-term interventions, which is what we're considering today, and long-term interventions. So the interventions that we have in front of us are all short-term interventions. The long-term interventions have to await the regeneration strategy. The strategic approach has the community at the heart of it, and it is a really good model for in a non-threatening environment. You have an opportunity to consider. They'll have the Tonkin and Taylor report that'll be November. Yeah.
Like we consult
considering a short-term option.
We consult over $300 yellow lines going down on the street for no parking. We're spending up to $2 million or $1 million, depending on on something that the community are raising concerns about, and we're not consulting or engaging publicly. So that's why I'm just raising the concern.
It's a short-term option.
I understand it's
short-term.
not
the end of the matter.
Changed.
Yeah, well, it's serious. It's a 20-year option, so it's. But
yes, I know, but the point is that you've got to think of the regeneration planning as a much longer period than 20 years, a hell of a lot longer. But it doesn't mean we're going to do nothing for 20 years. But you know, look, I'm in council's hands. I mean, the council is perfectly entitled to decline to go down this track.
I was just trying to get advice from the organisation around whether they think the community's preferences, as expressed in the report, are adequate based on the number of concerns that have been raised.
It is. Look, if you're saying, is there a unanimous view emerging from that particular environment? No, there isn't. I mean, I've had emails today from people who live in the area who don't support the view of the community board. But that's not the point. The point is that this is a short-term temporary option, and you know, I'm happy to support one thing that provides protection for, you know, a degree of protection for the area that is where the houses are. I think we can do a lot more work once we're into the regeneration strategic approach and the Tonkin and Taylor report for the others. Now, I've got a list of people. I've got Sarah, Tim, and then Glenn.
Thank you. Just three quick things. When you're talking about the community-led engagement process, I'm just super aware that there are members of the community who currently don't feel like they could speak publicly against, you know, the hard edge and those kind of hard engineering solutions, because they feel intimidated by a vocal group who really do want those. So I'm just making sure that whatever process is community-led is also managed carefully by council, so that people do feel like they can input a contrary view and that we don't just get a one-sided opinion.
Yes, yeah, so that engagement plan will, and the process will ensure that happens, because no predetermined outcome, so everybody needs to be able to feel comfortable to put forward their views, and those views will be considered. So it will be designed to ensure we get the greatest engagement.
Yeah, that's good, because I know that there are people who currently don't feel like they can speak. So,
and the full range of options need to be considered. Yes.
Cool. And the other thing is, on the reserve management plan, it says that 3.3.1 again, proposed stop bank works must be considered in consultation with tangata whenua. I'm just wondering if any local iwi consultation has occurred at this point.
Yeah, we have had initial discussion with MKT around the option 2, which is the stabilisation of the emergency works, and the need or otherwise for a cultural impact assessment. So that discussion has started.
Yeah, so I can understand that for the current stabilisation works, but the works that are in place, but the proposed works are the extension. And have we talked to tangata whenua, local iwi, about the proposed extension?
We haven't limited that conversation to the stabilisation of the emergency works. It's just been triggered by that sort of resource consenting process.
Okay, so we haven't done what the management plan says yet?
Yeah, it's a process that's underway.
Okay, so it's going to start. Okay, but it would have been good to have that feedback prior to making a decision on whether we should go ahead with them. Yeah. And just the last one, there's been some talk of the current management plan, about it being widely consulted on and those kind of things being revoked by the community board, and I'm just wondering what the process or legal requirements are around that, because I know that it's being talked about, and whether that needs to be replaced by a new one at the same time, because my understanding is that the reserves need one at all times.
So to modify a management plan, if you're looking at a minor change, then that can be a council decision to potentially involving affected stakeholders, but it can be a council decision. A
council decision, but not a community board one? Or a community board one?
It normally would be a council decision.
Okay, and to simply revoke a reserve management plan, can you actually revoke one without?
But if the effect was deemed to be significant and a comprehensive review is required, so that, for example, if you change the position of the bunds, then that would have other effects within the area, so that you're probably looking at a comprehensive review, which then, under the Reserved Act, requires full consultation. So effectively the standard management plan process, which could be anywhere between in this case, it might be a little bit shorter, but probably at least 9 months up to a year.
Okay, but under the Reserves Act, you couldn't simply revoke it?
There's no such thing.
Okay, thank you.
Revoke a reserve classification, but not a management plan.
Thank you very much.
Right, Sarah, done, Tim and then Glenn.
Thank you. If you look at the picture on page 117, it's 6.1, and I'm not quite sure who to aim the question at, but you know, we've been careful with the money we have and clever with the budgets, etc., and we're always looking for more bang for buck, although she's not here. But when we did our walk, and if you look at the picture, you can see the jetty, it comes out, and south of that, you can see the brand new boat ramp, which I have to say is pretty impressive. So why is there a proposal for us, or a plan, or is it planned, for the second boat ramp at the car park? Can anyone, because if we're trying to be clever, why would you have 2 boat ramps? And we're looking at funds in that area, and I'm presuming that we're building the car park's being done now, so therefore that would be in that design, because you can't go from a car park to a boat ramp without some kind of interconnection. So
sorry, off the top of my head, I think one was generally for public use and one for the yacht club, but I'm not 100% sure about that, sorry.
So we're trying to be clever, and we're building 2 boat ramps within 100 metres or so of each other. It's just ridiculous. Sorry.
Who's paying for them?
Yeah, what budget's that coming? I mean,
David said Fulton Hogan.
Yeah, Fulton Hogan paid for the big one.
Yep.
And I'm not sure where the budget is or whatever, but I am led to believe that the other one is more of a public boat ramp that they're going to, it's probably easier to repair it than to rip it out.
I'm certainly not going to support. I mean, we've got to work with communities, and communities got to work together. And suddenly we're going to have 2 boat ramps 100 metres apart. And fantastic that Fulton Hogan paid for the one for the club, which is great. But surely there's got to be some interconnection in there.
Well, I'm sure that sort of aspect can be worked through, but I'm certainly not as guy in the picture whether it's 1 boat ramp or 2.
Yeah.
There's actually a third that used to be
yeah.
beside the jetty, and I think that's probably going in the...
And we used to have, yeah, absolutely, and there used to be motor racing in the estuary, but there's not anymore. But I mean, fact matters, we're in a different world now, and we've got to be clever. And here we have, and I have to say, it's been well built. It's a great looking boat ramp, and it's fantastic for that community. But we have to get clever.
But that's another argument. I think it's ancillary to what we're discussing today.
Well, it's about the whole environment.
Glenn?
Thank you. I just wanted to reassure Councillor Johansson that I'd been contacted by a spokesperson from Seafield Place and also Craddock Street that met with their local MP that wanted to know what was the council proposing to do by way of any kind of seawall stop bank to protect properties. And this is when this item was first on the agenda, and so I sent back the report at the time. So in terms of the consultation question, I'm not sure how much further we would get, or rather add value if we went back to the residents when they've already come to us. So they just want some reassurance. They want to know we're taking some action.
Yep. All right. So, Mike?
Thank you. Just want to try and get a gauge on the 19 homes that could be have reduced level of risk from the funding. From the July event, there were, I think, 1 permanent house and a temporary house that got flooded. What was the estimated number of houses that could have been flooded from that event? We haven't necessarily run that event through the hydraulic model to get a parallel estimate. It's not, that might be an activity we undertake through the next design stages, but it's not something I have to hand, sorry.
Okay, because obviously going back to the task force report, it said there was 2 houses that could have been protected, and then suddenly we got one area that suddenly bumped up to 19 where we haven't done the detailed hydraulic modelling. So it's already been said that's probably an overestimate. So I'm just trying to get where that level really sits, because from what I can see, a lot of this bunding, all it's going to do is protect a campground and actually not houses. And like, across the city, we've got issues with flooding, lower grounds and flooding, and we really need to prioritise homes that we know are at great risk. And so this is my concern when we have 19, what really is probably an overestimate, how close we can get to a more truer indication of what the risk is.
So in that middle reach, certainly the campground is first at risk, and that there's depression formed within the campground that would have to fill before you'd overtop and flow down into the residential areas. Again, if there's enough volume of water coming into that area to fill that depression and spill down into Estuary Road is the subject of further analysis.
So we're talking about an extreme event. How extreme then does the event need to be to actually flood these properties, to go above the floor levels?
Well, we are talking about extreme events. I think the recent July flood event is significant. It was a very extreme event, and we saw that there was some overtopping of the estuary edge behind the campground, and that there was some flow into the campground, but that wasn't sufficient, didn't appear to be sufficient to flood the campground entirely, for example, or spill further downstream. So we are talking about very infrequent
And that event on in July was like the biggest event since I think the 60s or something like that. And so you're talking
it affects different properties in different ways.
But are you talking about a bigger event than that?
Well, as Keith mentioned earlier, not all events are the same. The flood risk is built up of a whole lot of different components. We need to understand all those components individually and collectively in order to get a complete understanding of the risk. That event that occurred in July doesn't represent all possible storm events or all possible estuary water levels that might occur. But yes, it was a pretty extreme event. We see that, as you mentioned, that it was the highest on record. If we had that same event again, then it would need to go on for longer, for example, in order to activate that overland flow path in the way that would be managed through this bund. Thanks.
Right. Okay, Yanni raised a question about the email that was received, and I have got it, and I have got a response to it, but and I just wanted to give people reassurance. So the notification was under the Soil Conservation and Rivers Control Act 1941. That applies to ECAN, not to the council. So it's just it's just an incorrect notification, and it doesn't meet the intent of the legislation that would apply to us, which is the Drainage Act. So it's just in the local body amalgamations, the boards went with they took the catchment boards went with the region, and the drainage boards went with the city. So, but anyway, we'll just get that tidied up and circulated to people in due course. But you know, it was fair enough. I'm sorry, I just didn't read every single email I got that day. All right. So how do you want to deal with this? Do you want to move the?
Well, I'm happy to move the amendment, splitting the original option 1 into a new option 1 and 2.
Yep. Okay. Well, I'm happy to second that. And so that would. So that would replace 1, and then 2 and 3 would become 3 and 4. Yeah, okay. Option 3.
Which is the do nothing short term.
Sorry. I don't think you need to. That's the opposite, though. No. You don't need to pass it if it doesn't pass. The point, you don't need to move it if it doesn't pass.
Well, there's another option that could be foreshadowed, so I was doing there's 3 options, so I was foreshadowing a third rather than 4.
If this fails, there will be no additional work.
No, but someone could move something else, so I thought I'd get them first.
They could move, you do all the work.
Are there any other foreshadowed motions?
I foreshadow that I'd second the foreshadowed one.
No, so it's either this option now, or it fails. So I think I'll just invite people to speak for it and against it. So Dave, would you like to lead off?
Can I just ask for one thing before you move that? Tonkin and Taylor do a lot of reports for council.
Yeah.
Could we refer to that as the revised coastal hazards assessment?
Yes. Once the revised coastal hazards assessment has been received.
Wonderful.
Report, that's fine. Yep, thank you. All right, David.
Thank you. Look, firstly, can I just acknowledge that the original proposal before us does address the short-term flooding mitigation options, and that the Community Board recommendation is actually more of a combination of erosion and flooding controls. I'd also like to acknowledge that the Heathcote issues are a higher priority, and that works that we are looking at here are actually funded from Avon Stop Bank budgets. I'd like to just re-emphasise that the South Brighton Domain is a much loved recreation area for the coastal ward. In fact, you know, really when things are a bit scaly on the beach, this area is a really sheltered and highly used recreation area. I support the amendment to defer any action on the middle area, pending further investigation, community consultation with other interest groups associated with the estuary, and the release of the Tonkin and Taylor report that we referred to just a second ago in November. But on top of that, I'd also, you know, for a long time now we've been talking about regeneration planning for other earthquake-related activities in the South Brighton area, and I really want to see that issue progressed a lot faster than it is at the moment. We have a number of members of our community, particularly in the areas north and south of Bridge Street, that are looking for some action on that regeneration planning, and it is taking an exceedingly long time. Look, I'm elected to represent the interests, desires, aspirations of my ward, and just coincidentally I have beside me here a bit of work in progress. There's a lady in the South Brighton area, Samantha Fay's her name, and she's taken it on her own accord to actually go and talk to residents up and down her street and surrounding areas. It's a work in progress. There's 351 people have actually come back to her and said they actually quite like what the Community Board has recommended. I'd also like to acknowledge that yesterday we've had a couple of letters, emails to the contrary, and I'm sure there will be a number of people in our community that would have a contrary opinion. I'm reminded of my attendance at a Coastal Dune Forum a few months ago, where there was a coastal scientist, Jim Darm was his name, who specialises in a lot of work in the Coromandel area. He advocated that the best solutions are ones that evolve through community input, that have community buy-in, and possibly the ultimate solution is a community involved in the implementation of an agreed outcome, be that in its construction and or landscaping / planting. So I really ask councillors to endorse this amendment. We appreciate that this amendment or action in the middle area that we're deferring will require long-term planning initiatives, but people in my ward or the coastal ward are very passionate about their environment and will rise to the occasion, as they have done on many occasions, to ensure that the best outcome for their area is achieved. So I think we have the opportunity to look at this area. It is unique, it is different, and it has a lot of attachment to people in my ward, and I really support this amendment, which gives us the opportunity to explore those options and come to a solution, like Jim Darm says, one that's had the buy-in from the community, had the buy-in from the interest groups, and we just get on and do something that we know is going to be not only good for our area, but a solution that has the agreement of everyone as well. Thank you.
Very good. Glenn, Sarah?
Thank you. I'd like to put my Avon Heathcote Estuary Eartie Trust hat on. So I'm the council liaison person with the trust. Although you know I still relate to the community board as the Burwood representative. I support these options here. You've heard about option 1 and the concern of the residents who many believe they accept the realities of climate change. They would also like protection with their area. And I think with options 2, 3, 4, they will serve to allow time for a group such as the Trust, which unites both the Heathcote and the Avon and the Community Board, to arrive at an agreed position. The Trust has reached out to the board through Tim and found the reception's been very favourable. So I'm hopeful that we can actually work together and not get into a kind of a warring scenario. We do have a duty, I think, of care, at least and I'll stress the moral sense of that, towards both our community, including the ecological community and those values which we must protect. I think in a way Evan Smith's initiative this Sunday is kind of a metaphor for the whole thing, you know, meet in the middle, and I think that's what we need to do with the Trust and the Community Board and our constituents. We don't want to end up warring. We actually need to meet in the middle. These are hard conversations to have over climate change with earthquake affected communities, but I think we do need to have them. And on that note, I think it's really important that the Community Board itself does start to use the language, so that's our board, David, that we start to use the language of climate change more often, and that we actually start to embed it in our plans going forward, because it is a reality, it is happening. You've seen the Banks Peninsula pictures this morning. You can't deny the information globally. We actually have to grab hold of it and try and work together. These are really hard issues, but we have to try and be open and honest with each other and find ways forward.
Yep. Sarah, then Phil, Pauline.
Thank you. I'd just like to take everyone back to the 24th of August meeting, where we actually approved the stabilisation for, you know, sort of up to 20 years of the temporary stop banks that have already been put in this area. And those stop banks have done a really good job, and we've approved stabilising them for $1 million plus or minus 40%. And we've done that work already, and that work has protected the houses that most need protection in this area already. There are houses who are now the next cab off the rank, but the worst ones are already now protected. Staff have told us that the risk to these other houses is now lower than previously thought, and they have said that deferral of any of these extensions is now actually a low risk. And so when we're looking at whether this is necessary or not, and the words necessary were in Dave's notice of motion from the 3rd of August, you know, extend the bund if necessary and where necessary. It's clearly not necessary at this point. The reserve management plan for the area talks about stop banks going in if necessary, and these ones are clearly not necessary. The management plan says that any proposed stop bank must be consulted on beforehand with tangata whenua, and that hasn't happened before today's meeting, and so I'm not sure that we can even go ahead and approve an extension of the bunds without that consultation happening.
Sure.
$1 million plus or minus 40% for this extra work may not seem like a lot of money to councillors when we're throwing around tens of millions of dollars in our conversations about land drainage. But $1 million to our community of ratepayers is a lot of money, and we are legally bound to be prudent with ratepayers' money. I'd like to remind councillors Livingston and East that while they are councillors for their specific wards, they are also city councillors. City councillors bound to act in the best interests of the whole city and of all of ratepayers' money, and I would like to urge them to think about that as they vote today. Councillor East was correct when he talked about the best solutions, ones being ones that have been done with community input, and the reserve management plan was just that. The reserve management plan done in 2014 after the earthquakes, with a lot of community engagement, talked very clearly about stop banks only being used where absolutely necessary, and about the naturalisation of the estuary edge for future good protection of the coastal environment and for the houses in the area. And so I'd like everyone today to think about that as we move forward, and to vote against the extension of the bunds today, and to look for future information if needed in the future.
Phil and Pauline.
Look, I'm going to support these recommendations. I have some sympathy really for the concept that in fact it's really important that we be careful with what might sound like only $1 million, as Sarah's suggesting, especially given the needs on the Heathcote, and I think that's been well illustrated. And while in fact this community need to have some flood protection too, there's no doubt that there's the same or greater urgency really, given the numbers of people on the Heathcote who've been flooded and flooded well above their floor level. And, I think though that the reason I'm going to support these recommendations is that I think at this stage a compromise is necessary. I would think that the community board sounds like they are prepared to move some way to actually accept what has been referred to as the very clear consequences now of climate change. And while certainly there's every reason for residents to be engaged in this, it's clearly going to be essential that they are all fully informed about the long-term impact of climate change, not just the short-term consequences of the recent flooding that we had, say. So I'm glad that in fact these that the options have, well, most of the northern section is remaining, and that's the area where staff have indicated that in fact homes are at the greatest risk of flooding, and that flooding would be reduced. So I think, as I'm saying too though, along with this, it's essential that the views of all of the community are heard, and so that they are fully informed.
Pauline?
Yeah, thank you. Now, this is a very difficult one. Of course, we'd all love to fix the whole city right now. We wish we had the money and the resourcing to do that. In 2014, as a result of the floods we had then, the staff produced the mayoral task force for flooding report, and it was a really detailed, really high level good report. And in there they identified levels of risk. Now, level 1 was when your house flooded above floor level. Level was floor level more than once. Level 2 was if it flooded below level or above floor level once. So, of course, we know Flockton was really high up in the numbers there. But then we have the second is the upper Heathcote and the lower Heathcote. Combined, they were about 209 in level 1 and level 2 combined. That's the number of houses at risk. Southshore, level 1, 1, level 2, 1. One house at risk of flooding above floor and one house at risk of flooding below floor. We have to use this as a guide for our priorities. Now, we say $1 million plus or minus 40%. In the greater scheme of the millions and millions and hundreds of millions of dollars of the Land Drainage Recovery Plan, yes, it might not be a lot, but when you apply it everywhere else, it does matter. We've had people in Heathcote waiting and waiting and waiting for their solution. Why? Because we're still under investigation. We haven't got all the investigation done yet. Southshore, we still haven't done the investigation. We're still waiting for the hydraulic modelling. We're still waiting for the Tonkin and Taylor report. And I think to be a balanced decision maker, we have to be fair. We have to be fair to the city. And as much as I really, really feel for people out there, and every time it rains we get a high tide of an event, it is scary. It's scary for people in Heathcote too. We have to wait for the evidence to make a good decision. So at this point in time, I'm sorry, I can't support this resolution. I can't support spending any more money out here today. And I think that what we've done is we've been told the risk has been lowered from the emergency works in the last event, and I think that I'm just happy to, well, not happy, but I'm going to have to stay with that and at the moment not spend any more money out here.
Mike and then Yanni.
Thank you, and I'm pretty much going to echo Councillor Cotter at the moment, and Councillor East said earlier, and rightly so, that obviously there's priority around the Heathcote River, and I think we really need to seriously look at that. This is a land drainage working program, recovery program, and it's a large sum of money. But if we're going to start pulling money out of different pots within that, well, we need to put that into the priority areas, and we know that the Heathcote is. So if we're going to pull out this $1 million to $1.4 million, let's see what we can do in Heathcote, because that is actually where the real need is. Listening to staff and reading through the reports, it's very clear, very, very clear, that actually the risk to this area is not as that high. And so we need to make sure that when we're going to be prioritising areas, we do it on level of risk to the houses that are going to be flooded. And we cannot go backwards because we have community groups that are louder than other ones that are actually patiently waiting, who are actually getting their houses flooded every time there's a small amount of rain. So I will not be supporting this option. We've got a recovery program. It is the right recovery program and has been prioritised accordingly, and so therefore I will not be supporting this.
Yanni?
Yeah, well, you know, I just wanted to say that I think you've come up with a good compromise resolution, and as someone who represents an area that has flooded, we're not waiting for the money, we're waiting for the investigation. And so I was really keen after the flooding in 2014 to put in some temporary measures that would alleviate, mitigate some of the potential risk. And obviously that hasn't happened, but I actually couldn't turn around to this community in South Brighton and say I wouldn't support putting in some temporary measures until we get the long-term solutions. And I wish that we'd done that in Heathcote, but you know, whatever that decision was made back then, we are where we are today. So I don't think it's fair to compete the areas against each other, to say that basically because they've got issues, then we shouldn't fix what is a concern in another area. In fact, we should be doing both. And if the people that are speaking against this option would like to put forward some proposals for the Heathcote to spend this money today, I'd be more than happy to support that. But at the moment, we've got this on the table, and I think actually, you know, we've had deputations, we've had a notice, although it's to a different organisation in terms of ECAN, around some of the concern around liability for increased flood risk post-earthquake. And if we learned anything from the recent events in July, it was the uncertain nature of the events that can happen in our city post-earthquake. And so I personally think that this is a small price to pay for giving some residents a greater level of comfort, not a perfect solution by any stretch of the imagination, but we're talking about an area that is very discreet, very small in terms of the compromise resolution that's been put forward, which I think is more than fair enough while we spend the time doing the longer term planning in this area. My preference would have been to go and have a public consultation and engagement, even over the short term options. But given that there's people living at risk of and threat of being flooding or coastal inundation, I think it is the right thing to do. So I'm very supportive of these resolutions that are being put. I would urge councillors to support it. I don't think it's fair to criticise this proposal at the expense of others, given that those other areas are also a priority and people are working hard on finding the solutions for them. And you know, at the end of the day, we do take a citywide approach to this, And my understanding of the land drainage program has been that we were being realistic about the stuff that we could get on and do that was less complicated and more simple and straightforward versus the stuff that was more complex and would take longer to understand. And I think that's the position we're in today. Staff have done a huge amount of work on this, and it would be a real shame to waste that by voting against what's been proposed.
Tim?
Thank you. Well, I just really want to clarify something. We're city councillors, and first of all, we have to represent the city and then the areas we live in. With the land drainage, it's really clear about priorities and where they sit. I won't be supporting this because I think that the land drainage program has identified the priorities and where they are, and we work through. It was obvious, you know, Flockton, Bells Creek, etc., and we are going to the highest needs, and that's what we've got to prioritise. So I don't really like us talking about this versus that. I think it's clear about the priorities in those areas. So that's where I stand. I've mentioned my area a number of times, but I've also supported the Flockton, I've also supported South Brighton, I've also supported Bells Creek area, and when we work around to those next areas, I'll be supporting those as well. But we do not have a finite amount of money, and when you see, you know, two boat ramps being built and all this type of thing, you know, we've really got to get our heads around in 2017 because we are up against financial restraints as well. So I won't be supporting this.
So before I come back to David, Jimmy?
Okay, yeah. So after the fellow council's debate, this is very complicated, the comprehensive report, but I'm not supporting this one because I heard the debate. First one is that we need to separate the short term and the long term. No? If we recognize, if we mitigate the flooding, the immediate flooding the response, that's short term. We focus on maybe the option one, the staff original recommendation, that's based one. But regarding to the long-term one, you know, under the kind of land drainage recovery plan, probably this section is part of the attention of the bank, should be under that one. But at the moment we have not yet, you know, get a further investigation. That's one issue. Second one is our budget. We always mention, especially we're dealing with some other issue, we always mention as a council, we should citywide rather than just prefer in favor in your local area, etc. So prioritize and take a prudent way is important. If we go to the amendment, if additional 1.2 or 1.4 million dollars, but whether it's higher priority, then I go with the particular Sarah's the term, particularly she mentioned, a moment this is the necessary or this is the nice to have. We need to identify these three criteria. So I'm not a support amendment, but I go with the staff recommendation.
Very good. Andrew?
Just briefly, and this is a difficult one to weigh up both sides of the argument, and it's around priorities and it's around effects, and of course the effects of flooding aren't exactly the same across the city, and it's easy to measure these things by numbers, but I also think it's important to measure things by effect. There could be a small number of properties affected, but they could be affected badly in an event which caused flooding of those areas. I think there are some good reasons for supporting what really is a compromise solution. I can see that the community board and the local councillors have certainly moved some distance from the original positions that were taken, and I think that's something that should be acknowledged. I also pick on the comments that have been made by colleagues around an acknowledgement within the community board representing that part of the city of the natural hazards that inherently affect that ward, and a greater understanding of that, and obviously the need for more work around it. I would also remind councillors that there have been other occasions when we have funded land drainage works that haven't necessarily been of the highest priority in the land drainage recovery plan. I can recall, might have been a couple of annual plans ago, might have been the 2015 long-term plan. Somebody from the Heathcote Valley sitting at the table here in tears because often when it rained the Matuku drain overflowed, And we funded that work, and we've now got a community in Heathcote, in the Heathcote Valley, who are a whole lot more confident about what happens when it rains than they were at that time. So and I'm not necessarily saying that we should take that as a precedent, but there have been examples in the past where we have funded work where the effects on individual homeowners, individual residents, have been significant, even though there may not have been large numbers of those residents. So I'm going to be supporting this today, not least because I think it's great that we've come to a solution which is a compromise from what appeared to be some reasonably hardline positions that had been taken in the past.
Yeah, I just want to say a couple of words about why I seconded the resolution before David closes off the debate. And that is because, in fact, it's in many respects it's similar to what Andrew just said. And that is that this is a really complex environment. And in terms of the challenges that we need to confront in this environment, it's not just about flood risk, it's about coastal erosion as well. And once you get into those areas, there are a huge number of issues. What this does is that it gives a temporary measure of support around the residential component, which enables people to know that they've got some a relative protection for a period of time before we get into those really hard issues. We know that the way that it was dealt with in the district plan review was unhelpful to creating a trusting environment for us to have some challenging conversations about the nature of that environment and going into the future. I think everyone agrees that the estuary side is way more challenging in terms of that future than the coastal side, which happens to be an accreting beach, which provides a degree of comfort that isn't experienced on the other side. So, you know, there's a lot of work to be done, but there's a lot of goodwill around the table, and I agree entirely with Andrew to see that shift even today gives me great hope for the next step, which is going to be the hardest step of all, which is working through all of these issues. But the beauty of the environment that we're in now is that we have time, and we didn't have time when we were in the, you know, the pressure cooker environment of a district plan review, which was just too rushed. So, David, if you'd like to close off the debate.
Thank you for the various comments around the room today, and I do thank you for your acceptance that yes, the community board, or myself and my colleagues, have moved to a degree on the proposal that the community board put up in the first place. I would like to just emphasise, I think, that not only are we dealing with sort of flooding risk and a bit of erosion there, but we also have to appreciate that the dynamics of the South Brighton, Southshore area itself, in that if you go right to the end of the Southshore spit, in fact that area rose in the earthquake. The area that we are considering in option 1 is an area that not only is subject to potential flooding, but it's been exacerbated by the fact that this area in the earthquake sunk over a metre in places. So there is a latent issue for flooding in the area north and south of Bridge Street. And I go back to my earlier comments. We are doing regeneration planning addressing earthquake effects in the South New Brighton area, and I can't emphasise to any greater extent how distressing it is to some people in that community that process is taking quite some time. So I'm very keen to see that lifted to a place where that process can advance towards ministerial approval. But before us today we have split the estuary coastline, and we are asking that consideration be given to allowing the staff to continue the bunding, and I would emphasise it's bunding, it's not stop banks, as Sarah seemed to get a little bit twisted up on earlier. There is a stop bank coming in, a short piece of stop bank that has been planned and budgeted for, and then we are continuing the bunding from that bit of short stop bank back through to the Beatty Street area, where it will offer a level of protection not only for the residents in Seafield Crescent, but the primary school boundary comes very close to the estuary, and they are at risk as well. It's no surprise to some people that post-earthquake, that particular school have life jackets for every kid in the school as part of their emergency response. So I'm very keen to see option 1 and 2 supported here today. Option 1 obviously does allow a level of protection for that particular part of the estuary coastline where housing is quite close to the estuary, and the school's very close to the estuary, and so that to me is a bit of a no-brainer, giving those people that added security. And I'm also very happy to support part 2, where we can look at that middle section and evaluate options, evaluate our position. If we need to go to long-term funding options, well, so be it, but it at least gives local communities the opportunity to engage with council, engage with the interest groups around the estuary, and consider the recommendations that the Tonkin and Taylor what's the exact revised coastal hazards assessment report brings forward. So thank you for that, and I would urge councillors that they support this amendment.
That's good. Okay, thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Eh?
We put one second.
All right. Okay. Well.
2, 3, 4 or 5.
Okay. Well, so we'll hit.
Number 4 says option 1 in it, when we're actually having an alternate half option there.
Option 1.
Option 1 isn't what we're putting out.
Oh, sorry, I had a helpful comment earlier on that got me to fix that. So, but it was resolution 3. So, look, why don't you just delete 4 altogether? We don't need it. I mean, staff have been asked to engage, and they're going to report back to us. Why don't we just request that staff engage with Environment Canterbury, clarify roles, blah blah blah, noting the time frame. No, actually, we don't. Yeah. And report back to council at the earliest opportunity. So just add those words. Yeah. And report back to council at the earliest opportunity. And then yeah, cool. Thank you. Right, now I'll put item 1. Those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no.
No.
Do you want to put up your hand for no? That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Have you got the names? Leave your hands up. Yep. So that's carried. Thank you. Right, so put the remainder of the resolution. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thank you.